Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. Aaron Abbott stood motionless on the sweeping observation deck of the Aegis space station. The reinforced permaglass windows stretched from the polished floor to the towering ceiling, framing a vista that would have driven an ordinary man to pure despair. He stared out at the encroaching doom, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The Galactic Empire had arrived, and they brought a storm of unyielding metal and fire. 4,000 warships breached the outer perimeter of the solar system, their massive hulls reflecting the distant, cold light of the sun. They moved with a predatory, synchronized grace, fanning out in a flawless spherical formation to cage the blue marble below. The Empire did not just want military victory, they wanted absolute, humiliating submission. Their vanguard vessels, dreadnoughts the size of floating continents, initiated the total energy blockade. Shimmering fields of purple interference webbed across the orbital space, weaving a suffocating net designed to choke off every single joule of energy humanity relied upon for survival. The intention was crystal clear. They aimed to starve the cradle of mankind, halting global commerce, communication, and life support, seeking to crush the human spirit long before they ever needed to fire a single plasma weapon. Aaron watched the energy net coalesce and harden into an impenetrable shell. Yet his breathing remained perfectly even, his posture completely undisturbed. The stark, tense silence of the observation deck shattered as the main communication console flared to life with a blinding glare. The imposing holographic projection of the Empire General materialized in the dead center of the room. The alien commander stood tall, clad in ceremonial obsidian armor that hummed with the stolen energy of countless conquered worlds. His facial features were sharp and predatory, exuding centuries of unchallenged galactic supremacy. The general did not offer a diplomatic greeting. He simply delivered a brutal ultimatum, his voice echoing with heavy synthetic amplification. Aaron Abbott, representative of the human species. The general sneered, his tone dripping with absolute, terrifying contempt. You are hopelessly outmatched, entirely outgunned, and completely cut off from the rest of the universe. Sign the Treaty of Unconditional Surrender immediately. Hand over the sovereign rights and resources of your miserable planet right now. Or my fleet will systematically wipe out every last ember of hope your species possesses. You have zero chance of survival. You have nowhere to run. The transmission hovered in the cold air, a digital ghost demanding total subjugation. Aaron did not flinch. He did not raise his voice, nor did he show a singular trace of anxiety. His expression remained incredibly relaxed, a bizarre anomaly of calm in the face of absolute annihilation. He turned slowly from the vast viewport, his eyes locking onto the tactical officers stationed at the lower command tier. The crew members looked up at him, anticipating the frantic, desperate orders of a cornered leader. Instead, Aaron offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "Initiate the shadow protocol," Aaron commanded softly, his voice devoid of any tremor or fear. "Shut down all artificial power systems across the entire planet. Plunge it all into the dark." The chief tactical officer hesitated for only a fraction of a second before her fingers danced across the luminescent console. "Confirming your order. Shutting down the global grid now." Below the station, the majestic, glowing tapestry of Earth began to change. From the sprawling, neon-lit megacities of North America to the densely illuminated coastlines of Asia, the lights flickered and died. It happened rapidly, a cascading wave of absolute darkness sweeping across the continents like a shadow tide. Within just a few minutes, the vibrant night side of the planet turned pitch black, completely swallowed by the surrounding void. Every industrial factory, every sprawling residential sector, and every orbital defense satellite powered down simultaneously, plunging billions of humans into total darkness. The planet went completely silent, resembling a dead world floating aimlessly in space. On the holographic feed, the alien general threw his head back and let out a grating, metallic laugh that rattled the bulkheads of the Aegis. The sight of the darkened, silent world amused him endlessly. He looked at Aaron with a mixture of pathetic pity and cruel, overbearing satisfaction. "Look at your pathetic, weak world," the general mocked loudly. "You cowards are so paralyzed by fear that you would rather plunge yourselves into the dark ages and self-destruct than face our glorious wrath. You turn off your own life support just to hide. How utterly disappointing and pathetic." But the general did not understand the true nature of the prey he was hunting. The Empire looked down and saw only surrender in the darkness. They saw a frightened, primitive civilization pulling the plug on its own existence out of sheer terror. They were entirely, fatally wrong. The global blackout was never a gesture of defeat. It was a strictly calculated, necessary sacrifice. Aaron turned his back on the laughing hologram and looked out the window again, watching the dead planet below with cold, calculated anticipation. Humanity was not retreating into the shadows. They were merely making room. The artificial power grid of the surface had to be forcefully killed to redirect the unimaginable flow of raw power, deep beneath the shifting tectonic plates, hidden safely beneath the Earth crust for several decades. Something else was waking up, a colossal, continent-sized network, vastly larger and far more terrifying than anything the arrogant empire had ever encountered. Required a perfectly clean slate to boot up. The darkness was not the end of humanity. It was the deep, silent intake of breath before a technological roar that would soon shatter the very foundations of the galaxy. The silence that followed the global blackout was heavy, but it was abruptly shattered as the primary communications array on the Aegis space station forced itself back online. A blinding flash of hard, blue light cut through the dim, tactical illumination of our command deck, coalescing once again into the towering holographic projection of the Empire General. His reappearance filled the room with a palpable, arrogant energy that seemed to mock the quiet stillness we had just established. The alien commander leaned forward, his ceremonial obsidian armor gleaming under the synthetic light, and he looked down upon us with an expression of absolute, unadulterated disgust. His voice, amplified by the dreadnought massive broadcast systems, boomed across the deck, rattling the specialized acoustic dampeners in the walls. "Do you truly believe that hiding in the dark will save you from the inevitable? Human!" the general sneered, his tone dripping with centuries of unchallenged imperial supremacy. "Your pathetic attempt to blind yourselves is nothing but a cowardly delay tactic. The Emperor, in his boundless and supreme generosity, has decided to offer you a singular, fleeting opportunity. We are giving you exactly 24 hours. You have 24 hours to drop to your knees, open a direct channel to the imperial throne, and beg for his absolute mercy. If you do not offer your unconditional surrender and complete submission within those 24 hours, we will simply open fire and turn your silent little rock into a molten monument of our absolute power." The threat hung in the freezing air of the control room, a heavy promise of total annihilation. I stood my ground, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the tactical holotable. I did not break eye contact with the towering projection. Instead, I let a slow, deliberate smile form on my face. It was a genuine expression, born of a profound, calculated anticipation that the alien commander could not possibly comprehend. "General," I replied smoothly, keeping my voice incredibly soft yet completely steady, devoid of any panic or urgency. You profoundly misunderstand our actions. We are not cowering in fear, and we certainly have no intention of begging. To be entirely honest with you, we are simply taking this time to enjoy this perfect, uninterrupted tranquility to its absolute fullest. It is exceedingly rare that our world gets to experience such a profound, collective quiet. We are merely appreciating the peace while it lasts. Before the arrogant alien could process the sheer audacity of my relaxed response, I reached out and decisively severed the communication link. The massive hologram collapsed instantly into a brief shower of digital sparks, plunging the command room back into the soft, low hum of our localized life support systems. The very second the channel closed, the atmosphere on the Aegis transformed from a tense diplomatic standoff into a theater of razor-sharp, focused execution. My chief engineer, Dr. Elena Vance, stepped rapidly up to the main console, her eyes darting across the complex, cascading streams of encrypted data flowing across her terminal. "Director Abbott," she reported, her voice tightly controlled but laced with a thrilling undercurrent of pure adrenaline. "The Shadow Network has achieved perfect synchronization. The planetary blackout provided the exact clean slate we needed. Our invisible harvesting tethers have successfully bypassed the exosphere. I am confirming a hard quantum lock. We have successfully connected the hidden grid directly to the outer armor plating of the entire Imperial blockade." I looked down at the tactical display monitor. The imposing spherical cage of the Empire fleet, represented by thousands of red markers, was no longer just a military blockade. It was now unknowingly caught in a vast, invisible spider web. "Status on the extraction protocol?" I asked, watching the intricate dance of telemetry numbers sweeping across the primary monitor. "Extraction is fully operational," Vance confirmed, her fingers flying across the holographic keys. "The tethering process completely bypassed their localized deflector shields because it reads as background cosmic radiation. We are now directly hooked into the primary reactor cores of all 4,000 warships. The drain is operating at a micro-stealth frequency. We are slowly, methodically siphoning their raw quantum plasma straight down the tethers and funneling it directly into our deep core planetary capacitors. We are bleeding them dry, and they are completely oblivious." This precise moment was the quiet culmination of generations of painstaking, clandestine labor. The Galactic Empire, blinded by its infinite arrogance, had always viewed the Outer Rim territories near our solar system as their personal, unregulated dumping ground. For several centuries, whenever their mighty armadas upgraded their propulsion drives or discarded their decaying energy manifolds, they simply jettisoned the technological garbage into the dead zones bordering our space. They viewed humanity as scavengers, a species too primitive to ever understand or utilize their highly advanced refuse. They were fatally mistaken. Over the decades, humanity had quietly launched salvage drones to gather every single piece of their discarded technology. We hauled back every burned-out reactor casing, every fractured sensor array, and every twisted piece of alien circuitry. In secret underground facilities, our brightest minds reverse-engineered their profound hubris. We meticulously repurposed their trash, weaving their discarded scraps into a highly sophisticated, completely invisible energy harvesting lattice that surrounded Earth like an unseen net. We had built a massive, parasitic vampire network entirely out of their own garbage, waiting patiently for the inevitable day they would arrive to conquer us. Millions of miles above our sleeping planet, aboard the majestic flagships of the Galactic Empire, the trap was slowly tightening. Deep within the pristine, glowing engineering bays of the alien dreadnoughts, a minuscule, faint yellow warning rune briefly flickered on the extreme edge of the secondary diagnostic screens. It was a minor discrepancy report, a tiny, seemingly insignificant anomaly suggesting a fractional drop in their overall reactor output efficiency. The alien technician manning the massive engineering console barely gave the flashing light a second glance. Conditioned by thousands of years of imperial indoctrination and absolute technological superiority, he found it fundamentally impossible that a primitive, self-blinded world could ever pose a microscopic threat to a dreadnought. He immediately dismissed the faint warning signal, casually attributing the minor power fluctuation to the residual magnetic interference of their own massive planetary blockade. Their absolute overconfidence in their supreme, unquestionable military might had completely blinded them to the invisible blade we had just slid directly into their heart. They firmly believed they had trapped a helpless prey, but in reality, they had just willingly plugged their entire invasion force into the largest, hungriest battery the universe had ever seen. By the 18th hour of the Grand Blockade, the suffocating arrogance that had previously filled the command bridge of the Imperial flagship completely evaporated, replaced by a creeping, icy panic. The absolute certainty of the Empire began to fracture not from a barrage of explosive torpedoes, but from a terrifying, inexplicable silence within their own bulkheads. The Master Gunnery Officer was the first to realize the catastrophic failure. When he attempted to run a standard diagnostic cycle on the planetary siege cannons, the pristine holographic interface flashed a severe red warning. The weapon systems could not reload. The colossal plasma banks, which were supposed to be drawing infinite power from the primary reactors, registered at absolute zero. The dreadnoughts were suddenly, inexplicably toothless. Confusion rapidly morphed into pure chaos. The Empire General, his ceremonial obsidian armor no longer looking quite so imposing, barked frantic, spittle-flecked orders across the enormous deck. He demanded an immediate tactical withdrawal, screaming at his helmsman to initiate the spatial jump engines so the fleet could retreat, regroup, and assess the invisible threat that was draining their vessels. The helm officers frantically punched commands into their consoles, their multi-fingered hands blurring across the screens in sheer desperation. But the result was completely identical. The hyperdrive coils were entirely unresponsive. The sublight thrusters were utterly dead. The entire armada of 4,000 invincible warships had been effortlessly reduced to a floating, paralyzed graveyard of useless metal, drifting helplessly in the cold vacuum above our world. Down on the Aegis observation deck, I stood with my hands resting casually behind my back, watching the frantic telemetry data cascading across my monitors. The invisible tether network we had established was performing flawlessly, systematically starving their fleet, but the physical energy drain was merely the first component of our trap. It was finally time to spring the psychological snare. I gestured for Dr. Vance to open a direct, unencrypted wideband channel, violently overriding the flagship localized security protocols and forcefully projecting my broadcast onto every single screen, monitor, and holographic projector across their entire paralyzed fleet. I did not start by speaking. Instead, I simply played a video file. The screens aboard the alien vessels illuminated with the high-definition recording from earlier that day, showing the general throwing his head back and delivering his grating, metallic laugh, mocking humanity for plunging ourselves into the dark. I let the recording loop twice, allowing the bitter irony of his arrogant laughter to echo through the terrified silence of their dead ships. Then, the video abruptly cut out, replaced by an overwhelmingly dense, sprawling financial report filled with millions of cascading data points, asset acquisitions, complex supply chain diagrams, and legally binding corporate signatures. "Good evening, General," I said, leaning casually toward the audio pickup, my voice dripping with razor-sharp sarcasm and cold, calculated logic. "You graciously gave us 24 hours to beg for mercy. We only needed 18 hours to completely dismantle your entire civilization. I sincerely hope you and your command staff are paying extremely close attention to the screens right now, because I am going to explain exactly how you lost this war before you even launched a single ship from your home world. The general stared at the financial report on his main viewer, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked ready to shatter, utterly bewildered by the rows of economic data flashing before his eyes. You see, General, your empire possesses a truly magnificent military-industrial complex. I continued, pacing slowly across the command center, so my voice carried a rhythmic, conversational cadence. But your profound arrogance made you remarkably lazy. You assumed that because you held supreme military power, the mundane details of galactic commerce and interstellar trade were completely beneath you. 10 years ago, our intelligence agencies realized a fundamental truth. The Empire did not actually build its own quantum core stabilizers. You outsourced that vital manufacturing process to a private, third-party conglomerate in the Outer Rim territories, simply because it saved your Emperor a few trillion credits in production costs. I tapped a key on my console, highlighting a specific, massive sector of the sprawling document on their screens. Through a highly intricate web of 300 shell companies, shadow corporations, and anonymous proxy buyers operating out of neutral trade zones, the human race began silently purchasing shares of that exact conglomerate. It took us 3 painstaking years, but we eventually acquired 51% of the company. We became the absolute majority shareholders of the very corporation that builds the beating heart of every single ship in your mighty armada. The bridge of the alien flagship was dead silent. The command staff stood completely frozen, the horrifying reality of my words slowly, agonizingly sinking into their rigid minds. Once we held the controlling interest, we quietly restructured the engineering division. I explained, maintaining a perfectly polite, almost educational tone that cut deeper than any blade. We legally mandated a sweeping firmware update across all produced quantum stabilizers. We categorized it as a standard efficiency diagnostic tool, entirely approved by your own imperial oversight committees. In reality, we installed a dormant, highly sophisticated, malicious code directly into the reactor routines of your entire fleet. For exactly 10 years, you have been actively buying our sabotaged engines, installing our compromised software, and flying our rigged ships, all through completely legal, fundamentally sound commercial transactions. I leaned closer to the camera, letting the sheer, crushing weight of our strategic masterpiece shatter their remaining pride. This was never a military conflict. General, you brought a fleet of warships to what is, fundamentally, a hostile corporate takeover. We did not need to outgun you, we simply bought you. To ensure the psychological shock was absolute, I brought up the intricate supply chain map of their entire military apparatus, rendering it in 3 dimensions across their screens. I methodically dismantled their illusions of invulnerability, pointing out every single logistical weakness they had arrogantly ignored over the centuries. Look closely at your logistics network, I commanded, my voice turning sharp and unforgiving. You relied on heavily automated routing protocols for your plasma distribution, utilizing software coded by a bankrupt subsidiary that our corporate front purchased 5 years ago. We literally wrote the code that dictates whether your weapons are allowed to fire. Look at your navigation arrays. The synthetic crystals required to focus your spatial jumps are mined from a star system whose sovereign debt we secretly bought out last decade. We literally own the mortgages on your mines. We control the factories that build your engines. We hold the exclusive patents on the software that runs your primary life support systems. I paused, letting the overwhelming, inescapable truth wash over them like a tidal wave of ice. The Empire had spent thousands of years conquering primitive worlds with brute force, entirely oblivious to the fact that humanity had spent the last decade conquering the Empire with checkbooks, legal loopholes, and weaponized capitalism. They were expecting a glorious, heroic last stand from a desperate, cornered world. Instead, they had walked blindly into a meticulously orchestrated financial snare that completely stripped them of their agency, their power, and their dignity. You are currently sitting in ships that we legally own, running software that we entirely control, utilizing power that we are currently repossessing," I concluded, staring directly into the wide, terrified eyes of the broken alien commander. "Your entire grand war machine is nothing more than a poorly managed subsidiary of the human race. And as of 18 hours ago, your services are officially terminated." The silence that followed across the Imperial comms was absolute and profound. On the flagship, not a single alien officer dared to speak. The general stood entirely paralyzed, the horrific realization of their complete and utter defeat short-circuiting his heavily indoctrinated mind. The terrifying shock of being outsmarted on a scale so vast, so fundamental, and so entirely legal had completely broken the spirit of the entire enemy command staff. They had lost control of the galaxy, and the bitterest truth of all was that they had legally signed the paperwork to let it happen. The psychological paralysis gripping the alien flagship did not last indefinitely. The profound shock of their absolute financial and tactical humiliation eventually boiled over into a blind, desperate fury. The Empire General, his pride completely shattered and his grand invasion reduced to a corporate repossession, made a final, catastrophic miscalculation. Driven by the sheer humiliation of being utterly outsmarted by a species he considered primitive scavengers, he violently slammed his fist into the emergency override console. Ignoring all standard chain-of-command protocols, he authorized the deployment of the ultimate Imperial failsafe. A high-frequency, hyper-encrypted distress beacon tore through the fabric of real space, screaming a frantic demand for immediate, overwhelming reinforcements. He was summoning the Grand Reserve Armada across dozens of conquered star systems and fortified military outposts. 20,000 heavily armored warships received the immediate call to arms. Inside the Aegis control room, the primary deep space telemetry radar illuminated with a terrifying density of hostile contacts. I stood perfectly still, my eyes tracking the massive cluster of new data points flooding our monitors. They appeared as a rapidly expanding swarm of brilliant crimson dots, completely swallowing the digital representation of the neighboring star sectors. This was a force of absolute cosmic destruction, an armada 5 times larger than the one currently paralyzed in our orbit. The strategic overlay calculated their trajectory and speed, confirming that 20,000 Imperial dreadnoughts, destroyers, and carrier vessels were currently tearing through the vacuum at the absolute speed of light. Their navigation computers locked directly onto Earth, the sheer gravitational displacement of a fleet that size moving at maximum velocity sent preliminary shockwaves rattling against our outer sensor buoys. It was an apocalyptic storm of metal and plasma rushing to wipe the human race from the annals of history. The atmosphere on the command deck instantly thickened with a suffocating, unbearable tension. My tactical officers looked up from their consoles, the glow of the incoming armada reflecting in their wide, terrified eyes. Standard military doctrine dictated that we should immediately scramble every available defensive drone, align all orbital railguns, and form a desperate, impenetrable blockade to shield our homeworld. But standard military doctrine was exactly what the Empire expected, and I had no intention of playing their archaic game of brute force. I maintained my perfectly relaxed posture, folding my arms across my chest as I analyzed the incoming swarm. There would be no defensive formation. There would be no desperate last stand. "Director!" Dr. Vance whispered, her voice tight with the unimaginable pressure of the approaching apocalypse. "They will arrive in our sector in less than 12 minutes. We cannot possibly physically repel 20,000 capital ships." "We are not going to repel them, Doctor," I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room with absolute, unwavering certainty. "We are going to welcome them. Open the network pathways. I want you to immediately expand the operational range of our malicious code. Do not keep it contained to the local ships. push the software update directly through their own spatial transit gates. Vance did not hesitate. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, initiating the most audacious tactical maneuver in the history of stellar warfare. The engineering staff immediately began redistributing the unimaginably colossal reservoir of raw quantum energy we had just siphoned from the first fleet of 4,000 paralyzed dreadnoughts, deep beneath the crust of the silent, darkened Earth. The massive planetary capacitors roared with stolen Imperial power. My crew expertly routed that exact same energy back up the invisible harvesting tethers, forcing it outward in a massive, continuous surge. We were not firing a weapon. We were weaponizing their own infrastructure. By channeling the stolen power directly into the Empire-established spatial transit network, we forcefully overwrote the fundamental physics of the local jump gates. The excess quantum plasma rapidly expanded, weaving itself into an infinitely dense, completely invisible quantum firewall that perfectly enveloped the entire outer boundary of our solar system. We were manipulating the very fabric of space, creating a highly volatile, one-way membrane. It was designed to let the incoming armada pass through the threshold, but the sheer density of the barrier would instantly sever their connection to any external command, control, or energy source the exact second they crossed the line. As the 20,000 warships initiated their final deceleration sequence, preparing to drop out of their light-speed jump and unleash total annihilation upon our world, I authorized one final, automated transmission. It was not a plea for peace, nor was it a threat of violence. I simply beamed a concise, unencrypted text directly into the navigation computers of the incoming armada, ensuring it would be the very first thing their fleet commanders saw when they reverted to real space. The message contained only a single, chillingly polite sentence. I informed them that they were eagerly stepping into an inescapable, perfect prison, completely built and entirely funded by their own imperial treasury. The trap was set, the door was wide open, and the Empire was blindly rushing straight into the abyss. The visual of 20,000 warships dropping out of light speed was nothing short of a cosmic cataclysm. Space itself seemed to scream as the fabric of the universe violently tore open along the outer edge of our solar system. A blinding, unified flash of aggressive crimson light washed over the observation deck of the Aegis space station, casting long, terrifying shadows across the room. One by one, then in batches of hundreds, and finally in a cascading waterfall of monolithic metal, the Grand Reserve Armada of the Galactic Empire breached the perimeter. They blotted out the distant stars, forming a solid, jagged wall of heavily armored dreadnoughts and planetary siege platforms. The sheer gravitational displacement of 20,000 colossal vessels, coming to a sudden, synchronized halt, caused the station bulkheads to groan under the immense tidal stress. Before the residual energy of their spatial jump could even dissipate, the Armada moved with terrifying, practiced precision. Every single ship simultaneously adjusted its trajectory, their massive hulls groaning as they physically aligned their primary weapon batteries directly toward the silent, darkened sphere of Earth. Down on the command deck, our tactical monitors flared with an overwhelming sea of hostile target locks. The automated threat assessment system registered millions of individual heavy plasma cannons, singularity torpedoes, and orbital kinetic bombardments, all charging to maximum capacity. The combined destructive potential, aimed at our home world, was enough to crack the planet down to its molten core and scatter its ashes across the void. The main communication array violently flared back to life, ripping through our localized security protocols for the final time. The holographic projector illuminated the center of the room, bringing the towering figure of the Empire General back into existence. His previous state of absolute, crippling panic had been entirely erased, replaced by a manic, almost unhinged euphoria. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the overwhelming might of 20,000 fresh, heavily armed vessels. His obsidian armor seemed to absorb the ambient light, and his face was twisted into a cruel, triumphant sneer. He raised his hand, his multi-fingered claw hovering directly over the primary execution console, preparing to issue the final, irreversible command that would unleash the apocalyptic barrage. "Your pathetic little parlor tricks end right here. Human!" The general roared, his voice echoing with a fanatical, deafening intensity that shook the physical deck plates of the Aegis. "You thought you could trap the infinite might of the Emperor. You thought your petty financial manipulation and stolen power could stand against the true wrath of a galactic superpower. Your corporate game is definitively over. I am going to erase your species from the annals of time, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy watching your world burn to absolute cinders." He took a deep, aggressive breath, his finger descending toward the glaring red initiation rune on his console. At that exact, suspended moment in time, the crushing weight of impending doom hung over the entire human race. But I did not brace for impact. I did not flinch, and I did not look away. I maintained my perfectly upright posture, staring directly into the holographic eyes of the alien commander. My expression was an unbreakable mask of chilling, absolute tranquility. I leaned slightly toward the wideband transmission pickup. "That was just the beginning," I said slowly, enunciating every single syllable with a razor-sharp, terrifying finality, without ever breaking eye contact, and without blinking a single time. I calmly reached down to my primary command console. I rested my index finger against the final execution switch of our shadow network, and I pressed the button. The response was not an explosion. It was a profound, galaxy-shattering silence. The unimaginable ocean of quantum energy that we had stolen from their first fleet, which we had meticulously pooled within the deep planetary capacitors of Earth, was instantly released. It did not fire outward like a laser beam. Instead, it forcefully injected itself directly into the malicious code we had embedded within their core operating systems. I pushed the surging quantum current straight down the invisible, galaxy-spanning network of their own compromised technology. The violent wave of corrupted energy cascaded outward at an incalculable speed, traveling instantaneously through the very spatial jump gates the Armada had just used to arrive. The sheer volume of the hijacked power instantly overloaded every single spatial transit point within their Imperial infrastructure. Across the sweeping void of the solar system, the devastating result manifested in a fraction of a heartbeat. The brilliant, aggressive crimson glow of the 20,000 charging weapon batteries flickered violently. And then, in perfect, terrifying unison, they simply died. The massive plasma cannons went completely dark. The sublight thrusters glowing at the rear of the colossal dreadnoughts sputtered and extinguished. The artificial gravity generators and internal life support grids on every single alien vessel suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable short circuit. The entire armada of 20,000 invincible warships was suddenly transformed into a vast, silent graveyard. They instantly became nothing more than hollow tombs of useless scrap metal, drifting aimlessly in the cold vacuum of space. The majestic military formations broke apart as the dead behemoths silently collided with one another, completely devoid of any power to correct their chaotic, floating trajectory. But the devastation did not stop at our borders. The corrupted energy surge traveled through the transit gates and echoed backward across the entire expanse of the Milky Way. It struck their heavily fortified military outposts, their massive industrial forge worlds, and the glittering capital of the Empire itself. Every single vessel, every orbital defense platform, and every planetary power grid reliant on their outsourced, compromised quantum stabilizers experienced the exact same total: catastrophic failure. In one single, solitary instant, the entire galactic empire was completely, flawlessly frozen. They were entirely stripped of all their mobility, utterly robbed of their offensive capabilities, and plunged into the exact same suffocating darkness they had originally intended for us. The greatest military superpower the universe had ever known was instantly paralyzed by a single push of a button. The overwhelming, suffocating silence of the paralyzed armada was merely a blank canvas waiting for our final stroke. I did not intend to limit our victory to the local solar system. I instructed Dr. Vance to immediately expand our communication override far beyond the frozen ships in our orbit. We forced the stolen quantum energy back through the compromised spatial gates, pushing my audio and visual feed into the absolute deepest corners of the universe. We were no longer just broadcasting to the frightened soldiers outside our window. We were projecting directly into the Grand Council chambers, the planetary governorships, the massive industrial hubs, and the central command palaces of every single world within the Galactic Empire. I looked at the frozen, defeated holographic image of the Empire General. His face was entirely drained of its previous, arrogant color. His multi-fingered hands trembled uncontrollably by his sides. "General," I began, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying authority that echoed across billions of light years. "You fundamentally misunderstood our intentions from the very start. You assumed this invasion was your trap closing around us. In reality, your Grand Armada was merely a convenient conduit. We used the sheer mass of your localized ships and the raw power of your emergency distress beacon to meticulously map the exact pathways of your entire Imperial network. We did not want to blow up your ships. That would be a tragic, inefficient waste of perfectly good infrastructure. Instead, we chose a much more elegant, permanent route. We have entirely stripped you of your control over the galactic transit and energy distribution grids." I commanded the primary console to bring up a new holographic map of the known universe. It showed the sprawling Milky Way, a territory previously glowing with the aggressive crimson of Imperial control. Now, before their terrified eyes, a brilliant, pulsing blue light emanated directly from Earth. The blue light spread outward through the transit gates like glowing veins, delivering essential lifeblood to a dying body. "Take a very close look at the new administrative map of the galaxy," I instructed smoothly, ensuring every single planetary governor was listening. "Earth is no longer a primitive target for your colonial expansion. We are now the singular, exclusive energy coordination center for your entire civilization. Every single planet, every orbital space station, and every heavily fortified military outpost in your former empire currently relies entirely on the power grid that humanity now legally and physically controls. If you wish to keep your artificial gravity functioning, your atmospheric processors running, and your citizens breathing, you will pay the mandatory subscription fee. We own the grid, and we are heavily increasing the rent." With a swift, decisive motion across my terminal, I transmitted a dense, complex legal document to the General's primary console, while simultaneously mirroring it to every governing body across the galaxy. It was not a traditional treaty of military surrender. It was a crippling, ironclad corporate restructuring contract. "I am officially submitting the new terms of your employment," I stated coldly, letting the absolute reality of their situation sink in. "The clauses are intentionally severe. We are initiating a total galaxy-wide asset recovery protocol to cover the extreme inconveniences and damages of your attempted blockade. Your majestic fleets, your heavily fortified planets, your sprawling resource mines, and your grand imperial treasury are officially mortgaged to the human race for the next several thousand years. You are no longer proud, untouchable conquerors. You are now long-term, heavily indebted contractors working solely to pay off your cosmic mortgage to us." The alien commander stared blindly at the glowing contract hovering before him. The crushing realization of his absolute, irreversible defeat physically broke him. The imposing, ceremonial obsidian armor seemed to weigh heavily upon his shoulders as his knees finally gave out. He collapsed completely onto the cold deck of his dead flagship, the pathetic metallic thud echoing through the open comms channel for the entire galaxy to hear. He had absolutely no choice. His life support systems were operating on minimal emergency reserves. His emperor was utterly powerless, and his invincible military was completely paralyzed. With a trembling, defeated hand, he reached up to the execution console and pressed his biometric signature onto the binding document. He surrendered his entire ancient civilization not to a superior military force, but to a flawless, inescapable financial acquisition. Humanity had officially ascended to the supreme throne of the galaxy. We did not achieve this absolute supremacy by firing a single kinetic projectile or unleashing a single plasma beam. We conquered the stars through the most masterful, unprecedented strategy of corporate revenge and hostile takeover in the entire history of the universe. We simply bought our enemies, froze their assets, and leased their very lives back to them at an exorbitant interest rate. I reached over and permanently closed the communication channel, cutting off the general's broken feed and leaving the ruined empire to quietly process their harsh new reality in the dark. I turned away from the tactical displays and walked slowly back to the sweeping, permaglass observation window. Down below, the shadow protocol was officially rescinded. The deep planetary capacitors had perfectly finished their colossal work. Slowly, beautifully, the artificial lights of Earth began to flicker back to life. From the sweeping, neon-lit coastlines of North America to the vibrant, densely packed heart of Asia, a brilliant, warm glow systematically chased away the darkness. The blue marble shone brilliantly against the vast void once more. I stood quietly on the observation deck of the Aegis space station, watching our resilient homeworld awaken. We were perfectly safe, and we were finally ready to usher in a brand new, unimaginably prosperous era for mankind. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or the pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.